I'm Keziah Thorne, 32 years old, and I built a multi-million-dollar venture capital firm from a laptop in a windowless studio apartment while eating instant noodles for dinner. But standing in the backyard of my childhood home, none of that matters. The acrid smell of charcoal smoke stung my eyes as I watched my father stab a spatula into a hamburger patty. He didn't look up at me. He just sighed, a heavy, rattling sound that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the humid afternoon air. So, he grunted, flipping the meat with unnecessary aggression. Still doing that internet thing, my chest tightened. It wasn't an internet thing. It was Thorne and Associates, a firm that currently held equity in three of the top emerging tech startups in Silicon Valley. I opened my mouth to correct him, to tell him that Forbes just emailed me for an interview last week. But the words died in my throat. I knew the script, and I knew I couldn't rewrite it today. It's consulting, Dad, I said quietly, opting for the safe, vague lie they seem to prefer over the complicated truth. It's going well, he snorted. Consulting, he repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. That's what your cousin Eddie said he was doing before he moved back into his mother's basement. I gripped my plastic cup of lukewarm soda so hard the sides crinkled inward. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull up my banking app and show him a number that had 2 commas in it. I wanted to tell him that I had parked a brand new Porsche Panamera 2 blocks away just to avoid this exact conversation about frivolous spending. But then the sliding glass door opened. The atmosphere shifted instantly. It was like the sun had decided to shine specifically on the patio concrete. "Hi, Daddy." My sister, Clementine, stepped out holding a bowl of potato salad like it was the Holy Grail. She was 29, blonde, bubbly, and the undisputed golden child of the Thorne dynasty. My father's posture changed immediately. His shoulders dropped. The scowl vanished, replaced by a grin that actually reached his eyes. "There she is," he beamed, turning away from the grill to usher her in. "The working woman arrives." Clementine set the bowl down and smoothed her skirt. "Sorry I'm late," she said, casting a pitying glance in my direction. Traffic was a nightmare, and I had to finish up a report for Mr. Henderson. He relies on me so much these days. Mr. Henderson was the regional manager of a mid-sized paper supply company. Clementine was an administrative assistant. There was nothing wrong with that, absolutely nothing, but to my parents she was the CEO of the universe because she had a 401k match and dental benefits. "That's my girl," my mother chirped, appearing from the kitchen with a platter of buns. She bypassed me completely to squeeze Clementine's arm. "Always working hard, real stability, that's what matters." The implication hung in the air like the heavy smoke. Unlike Keziah, I took a sip of my flat soda to wash down the bitterness rising in my throat. My mother turned to Mrs. Gable, the next-door neighbor who was peering over the fence. "Oh, hi, Brenda," my mother called out. "Yes, everyone is here. Clementine just got here from the office. She's doing so well, up for a promotion soon." Mrs. Gable smiled toothily. "And how is Keziah?" I felt the heat rush up my neck. I braced myself. My mother's smile faltered just for a fraction of a second before she put on her brave face. "Oh, she's finding herself," my mother said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial stage whisper that was loud enough for the entire tri-state area to hear. "She's trying to get some freelance work off the ground. We're just happy she's exploring." I felt like I had been slapped. I employ 40 people. I just signed a lease on a penthouse floor in the financial district. Finding herself is what you say about a teenager taking a gap year, not a woman who just negotiated a 7-figure buyout. "Actually, Mom," I started, my voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to tell you guys about a new deal I closed." Not now, Keziah, my father cut in, waving the spatula at me dismissively. Don't bore Mrs. Gable with your little projects. Clementine, tell Brenda about the company picnic. I shut my mouth with an audible click of my teeth. I felt invisible. No, worse than invisible. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting a family that looked right through me. Clementine launched into a story about how she organized the potato sack race, and my parents watched her with rapt adoration. I looked down at my shoes, Italian leather loafers that cost more than my father's grill, and felt a sudden, childish urge to cry. Why did I keep coming back here? Why did I keep subjecting myself to this tribunal where the verdict was always guilty of mediocrity? You know, Clementine said, pausing her story to look at me with faux concern. If you're struggling for cash, Keziah, Mr. Henderson mentioned they might need a receptionist. It's entry level, but it's a paycheck. My father nodded vigorously. You should listen to your sister, Keziah. Swallow that pride. You need a real job. You can't play on the computer forever. You're practically useless out there in the real world without a steady paycheck. Useless. The word landed like a physical blow to the solar plexus. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, angry rhythm. I looked at Clementine, who was smiling that sweet, poisonous smile. I looked at my parents, nodding in agreement that I was the family failure. Something inside me snapped. Not a loud snap, but a quiet, permanent fracture. I forced a smile onto my face. It felt tight and unnatural, like a mask that didn't quite fit. Thanks, Clem, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'll keep that in mind. Just looking out for you, she cooed. Little did she know she was going to need that looking out very soon. Because what Clementine didn't mention, what she probably didn't even realize yet, was that the mid-sized paper supply company she worked for was currently in deep financial trouble. And the venture capital firm that was looking at acquiring their distressed assets? It was mine. I'm Keziah Thorne, 32 years old, and despite secretly running a multi-million-dollar venture capital firm, I was currently paralyzed by the sound of a fork hitting a wine glass. Clink, clink, clink. The sharp, high-pitched noise cut through the humid backyard air like a distress signal. Conversation died instantly. My father stood on the edge of the weathered wooden deck, towering over the gathered guests like a monarch addressing his subjects. He held a glass of cheap Merlot in one hand and a barbecue fork in the other. His chest was puffed out, stretching the fabric of his polo shirt. I knew that stance. I knew that glint in his eye. It was the look he saved for his proudest moments, a look I hadn't received since I won a spelling bee in the 3rd grade. Attention, everyone, he boomed, his voice projecting easily to the back of the yard where the neighbors were nursing their beers. If I could just have a moment of your time. My stomach turned over. I felt a physical wave of nausea roll through me, sensing exactly what was coming. I tried to shrink back into the shadow of the oak tree, wishing I could dissolve into the bark. We have some news, my father announced, pausing for dramatic effect. He reached out and pulled Clementine to his side. She went willingly, nestling under his arm with a practiced, modest smile that didn't quite reach her predatory eyes. As you all know, Clementine has been working incredibly hard, he continued, beaming down at her. But she hasn't just been working, oh no, she's been studying. A murmur went through the small crowd. I gripped my plastic cup tighter. I am proud, my father said, his voice trembling with genuine emotion, to announce that as of yesterday my daughter Clementine has completed her MBA with honors. Applause broke out. It was enthusiastic, loud, and genuine. Mrs. Gable actually whooped. My mother was dabbing her eyes with a napkin, looking at Clementine as if she had just cured a rare disease. Honors, my father shouted over the clapping. Top of her class, that's the Thorn work ethic right there. I clapped. I had to. If I didn't, I would look petulant, jealous, and bitter. So I slapped my hands together, the sound hollow and flat in my own ears. But the applause wasn't enough for him. He needed a counterpoint to make the victory shine brighter. He needed a shadow to make the light pop. Slowly his eyes scanned the crowd and landed on me. The smile didn't leave his face, but it changed. It curdled. It transformed from a beam of pride into a grimace of disappointment. The crowd followed his gaze. Suddenly, 20 pairs of eyes were fixed on me. My skin prickled with heat. It really is a shame, my father said, his voice dropping just enough to sound profound, yet loud enough to carry to the neighbor's patio 3 houses down. The backyard went silent. The birds seemed to stop singing. It's a shame, he repeated, shaking his head at me, that Keziah never had that same drive, that hunger. I stopped breathing. My lungs locked up. I stood there wearing a blazer that cost more than his car and let him dismantle me. Clementine has marketable talent, he lectured, gesturing with his wine glass, sloshing red liquid dangerously close to the rim. She understands how the real world works. She understands that you have to build something real, not just play around on the internet with whatever it is you do. He chuckled then. It was a dismissive, patronizing sound. Whatever freelancing means these days, he added, using air quotes with his fingers. Laughter, scattered, awkward laughter rippled through the guests. They weren't laughing with him, they were laughing to break the tension. But it sounded the same to me. I looked at Mrs. Gable. She wasn't laughing. She was tilting her head to the side, her lips pressed together in a tight, sad line. Pity. She was offering me pity. It felt like a paper cut across my iris. I didn't want their pity. I wanted their respect. I wanted to pull my phone out of my pocket, log into my brokerage account, and project the balance onto the side of the house like a drive-in movie. I wanted to scream that I had just acquired a logistics company in the Midwest before breakfast. I wanted to scream that marketable talent was the reason I was currently being courted by 2 separate Fortune 500 CEOs for a board seat. My hand spasmed. Crack. The sound was sharp and sudden, like a gunshot in a library. I had gripped my red plastic cup with such forceful, blind rage that the rim had shattered. Sticky, lukewarm cola erupted over my fingers. It dripped down my wrist, staining the cuff of my silk blouse. The dark liquid pooled in my palm, gross and humiliating. Everyone stared at my hand. Oh, Keziah, my mother sighed from the patio, shaking her head. Always so clumsy. Grab a paper towel for heaven's sake. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask why I was shaking. She just saw a mess that needed cleaning. I stared at the soda dripping from my fingers onto the grass, feeling the sticky sugar binding my skin, grounding me in this nightmare. Don't worry about her, Mom, Clementine's voice cut in. She stepped forward, pulling away from my father's embrace. She looked radiant, victorious. She walked toward me, her heels clicking on the patio pavers, closing the distance between us until she was just a few feet away. She looked at my ruined cup. Then she looked up at my face, and she winked. It was a slow, deliberate wink. Actually, Clementine said, turning back to address the crowd, her voice sickeningly sweet, I might be able to help. She turned back to me, her eyes dancing with malice. Now that I have my MBA, I'm going to be applying for executive track positions at some major firms in the city, she announced, making sure everyone could hear her benevolence. And Keziah, if I get in, I'm sure I could pull some strings. She reached out and patted my shoulder. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to recoil from her touch. I know for a fact that big firms always need receptionists, she cooed. It's not glamorous and the pay isn't great, but it would be a start for you, a real job with benefits. My father raised his glass in a toast. To Clementine, he shouted, always looking out for the little people, even her own sister. To Clementine, the neighbors echoed. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The urge to speak was violent. It clawed at my throat. I could end this right now. I could destroy them with 3 sentences. I could tell Clementine that the major firms she was dreaming about were the ones I ate for lunch. I could tell her that if she applied to any firm worth its salt in this city, her resume would eventually cross a desk that I owned. But I looked at my father's smug face. I looked at Clementine's triumphant smirk. And I realized something. Stopping them now would be too easy. It would be a quick, messy explosion. I didn't want a quick explosion. I wanted a slow, methodical demolition. I wanted to watch the realization dawn on them when it was far too late to backpedal. I swallowed the scream. I swallowed the truth. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a smile that felt like it was tearing my face apart. Thanks, Clementine, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's really generous of you. That's what family is for, she said, turning her back on me to accept another hug from Mrs. Gable. I looked down at my sticky hand. I wiped the soda on the grass. Let them have their barbecue. Let them have their toast. Clementine was going to apply for a job, and I was going to make sure she got the interview of a lifetime. I'm Keziah Thorne, 32 years old, and while my family thinks I'm an unemployable drifter, I am actually the managing partner of the city's most ruthless venture capital firm. Monday morning didn't break. It shattered the weekend's humidity with air-conditioned precision. I sat in my corner office on the 48th floor. The view from here was different. From down below in my parents' backyard, the skyscrapers looked like impossible monolithic gods. From up here, the cars and houses looked like toys I could sweep off the table with the back of my hand. My desk was a slab of black marble, cold enough to numb my forearms. The silence in the suite was absolute. It was a heavy, expensive silence. It was the polar opposite of the cacophony of the barbecue. There were no clinking forks here. No booming voices, no pitying whispers from neighbors. There was only the low, rhythmic hum of the server room down the hall, and the sound of my own steady breathing. I took a sip of my espresso. It was bitter, hot, and perfect. I spun my chair slowly, looking out at the sprawling urban grid where Clementine was likely waking up, hungover on cheap champagne and self-importance. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Come in, I said, my voice dropping into the lower register I reserved for business. The heavy oak door swung open. Marcus walked in. He was my executive assistant, a 25-year-old with a degree from Stanford and a fear of me that bordered on religious devotion. He was carrying a thick stack of cream-colored folders. Good morning, Ms. Thorne, he said, placing the stack on the corner of my desk with the care one might use when handling a live explosive. Morning, Marcus, I replied, not turning away from the window. What's the damage? The applications for the Senior Vice President of Operations, he said. HR did the initial scrub. They cut the list from 400 down to the top 12. I swiveled my chair around to face him. 12 is too many, I said flatly. I asked for the top 5. Marcus flinched slightly. I know, Ms. Thorne, but there were some compelling candidates. I didn't want to filter out potential diamonds. I looked at the stack. I hated hiring. It was a parade of egos wrapped in cardstock. Give me the highlights, I commanded, leaning back and crossing my legs. I don't have time to read fiction today. Marcus nodded, opening his tablet. Candidate 1 is a lateral move from JP Morgan, solid but expensive. Candidate 2 is internal from the analytics division, smart but lacks the killer instinct you asked for. I waved my hand dismissively. Boring, next. Well, Marcus said, hesitating. There is one that stood out, not because of experience per se, but because of audacity. My interest piqued. Audacity was a currency I understood. Go on, I said. She's fresh, Marcus explained, pulling a specific folder from the middle of the stack. Just completed her MBA, honors, top of her class, no actual executive experience, but her cover letter claims she's ready to revolutionize our legacy systems. I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. Someone fresh out of school wants to be a senior VP? I asked. At this firm. She's aggressive, Marcus said, offering the folder to me. She listed relentless ambition as a hard skill. I thought you might find it amusing if nothing else. I reached out and took the folder. The paper felt heavy and textured, expensive stock. Someone had paid extra for the linen finish. I flipped it open. The first thing I saw was the headshot. In high-end finance, including a photo on a resume is usually considered gauche, a rookie mistake. But there she was, professional lighting. Perfectly blown-out blonde hair. A smile that was meant to look welcoming but only succeeded in looking hungry. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stopped breathing. I stared at the face. I knew that face better than my own. I knew the tiny scar on her chin from when she pushed me off a swing set when we were 7. I knew the deadness behind the bright blue eyes. Clementine. My eyes drifted to the name printed in bold, sans serif font at the top of the page. Clementine Mariethorne below it, her summary, a visionary leader seeking to dominate the corporate landscape. My hand started to shake. Not from fear, not this time. It was a tremor of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I looked up at Marcus, my face a mask of calm. She applied here, I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said, oblivious to the nuclear warhead he had just placed on my desk. Submitted late last night. She marked it urgent priority. Of course she did. I looked back down at the resume. The irony was so thick I could taste it. At the barbecue, she had offered to get me a job as a receptionist. She had stood there dripping in my father's praise and told me she was going to apply to major firms. She didn't know. She had no idea that Orem Capital was my kingdom. My father never asked about my work. My mother never remembered the name of my company. To them, I was just playing on the internet. And because I operated behind a veil of holding companies and LLCs to keep my privacy, Clementine hadn't done her due diligence. She saw a prestigious firm, she saw a high salary, she saw a title she felt entitled to. She didn't see the predator waiting in the dark. I ran my finger over her name. She has no experience, I said softly. None, Marcus agreed. Technically, she's unqualified. I can toss it in the shredder right now. He reached for the folder. No, I snapped. My hand clamped down on the paper, pinning it to the marble. Marcus froze, his hand hovering in the air. Miss Thorne? I looked at Clementine's smiling face. I imagined her sitting at her laptop, uploading this file, thinking she was destined for greatness. I imagined her telling our father that she had applied for a senior VP role. I imagined the toast they would drink to her inevitable success. If I shredded this, she would just never hear back. She would assume we were too intimidated by her brilliance. She would move on to the next victim. That wasn't enough. That wasn't justice. Don't shred it, I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. I looked up at Marcus. Bring her in, Marcus blinked. I'm sorry, schedule an interview, I commanded. For this Friday. For the senior VP role, Marcus asked, confused. Ms. Thorne, she's a graduate student. She'll get eaten alive in the first round. I know, I whispered. I leaned forward, the leather of my chair creaking. But I don't want her in the first round with HR, I said. I want to interview her myself. Marcus's eyes widened. I rarely conducted initial interviews. I only stepped in for the final sign-off on seven-figure hires. You want to see her personally? Marcus asked. Oh yes, I said, closing the folder with a definitive thud. I want to see exactly what she brings to the table. I picked up my espresso cup. My hand was steady now, the shaking had stopped. Make sure she knows the managing partner is taking a special interest in her application, I added. Feed her ego, Marcus, tell her her resume was exceptional. Marcus nodded slowly, pulling out his phone to make the note. Understood, Friday at 10 a.m. Make it 9, I said. Let's start the day with some entertainment. Marcus turned to leave. Oh, and Marcus, he stopped at the door. Yes, Ms. Thorne. When you call her, I said, swiveling my chair back toward the window, looking out over the city that I owned and she merely rented. Don't tell her my name, just say the managing partner. Of course, he said and closed the door. I was alone again in the silence. But the silence wasn't empty anymore, it was filled with anticipation. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. Clementine wanted a job in the real world. She wanted to see how the big dogs played. I took a sip of my coffee. I was going to give her the most educational experience of her life. I'm Evelyn Thorne, 28 years old, and I own the multi-million-dollar private equity firm that my family thinks is a cute little internet blog. I watched the heavy oak door click shut behind Marcus. The silence rushed back in, but the energy in the room had shifted. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a war room. I reached for my desk phone, my fingernails clicking against the hard plastic receiver. I needed to ensure the trap was set with absolute precision. Marcus, I said the moment he picked up. Yes, Ms. Thorne. His voice was breathless, likely already scrambling to coordinate the impossible schedule I demanded. Change the protocol, I instructed, my eyes fixed on the digital clock on my wall. Do not schedule a screening call. Do not schedule a culture fit interview with HR. There was a pause on the line. You want to skip the vetting process entirely? He asked. Send her an invitation for the final round, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. Tell her that her credentials are so impressive we are fast-tracking her directly to the executive case study defense. The gauntlet, Marcus stammered. We called the final round the gauntlet for a reason. It was a 3-hour pressure cooker designed to break people who faked their way through the first 2 rounds. Yes, I said, and Marcus. Ma'am, scrub my name from the calendar invite, I ordered. Use the corporate alias. Managing partner. If she sees Evelyn, she runs. If she sees Thorne, she'll assume it's a coincidence or a distant relative. She's too narcissistic to imagine her little sister could be the one signing the checks. Understood. Invitation going out now, Marcus said. I hung up. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I turned back to my computer screens. The digital copy of Clementine's portfolio was still open on the left monitor. I maximized the window. It was time to see exactly what golden child competence looked like on paper. I spent the next 4 hours dissecting her application with the precision of a forensic pathologist. It was worse than I thought. It was a masterclass in fluff. The document was 30 pages long. 20 of those pages were pictures. There were photos of her leading study groups. Photos of her speaking at a student mixer. There was even a photo of her holding a trophy for a charity 5K run, listed under demonstrated endurance. I felt a physiological wave of nausea roll through my stomach. I scrolled down to her strategic vision section. The text was a word salad of corporate buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. I leverage synergistic paradigms to disrupt the status quo and empower stakeholders through holistic ideation. I read the sentence out loud to the empty room. It tasted like ash in my mouth. She didn't know what a balance sheet was. She had no concept of risk mitigation. She didn't know that Thorn Acquisitions wasn't just a fancy logo. It was a legacy built on 18-hour days and missed holidays. I remembered the barbecue 3 days ago. I remembered her laughing while she told our aunt that I probably worked as a virtual assistant. I remembered my father nodding in agreement, saying, "At least Evelyn stays out of trouble." My hands curled into fists on the cold marble of my desk. They didn't know I had bought the mortgage on their house 6 months ago through a shell company. They didn't know I controlled the debt of the very country club where they held their precious events. And Clementine certainly didn't know that she was applying to work for the useless sister she had tormented for 2 decades. I opened a blank document on my right monitor. I cracked my knuckles. It was time to prepare the interview questions. Usually I let my department heads handle the technical queries. Not this time. I needed to craft questions that would peel back the layers of her pretension until there was nothing left but the truth. I typed the first question. Walk me through a discounted cash flow analysis for a distressed asset with negative working capital. She wouldn't be able to do it. She would try to charm her way out. She would smile that dazzling smile and talk about big picture thinking. I typed the second question. To explain the liquidity implications of a leveraged buyout in a high interest rate environment given our current portfolio exposure. I felt a cold, sharp focus settle over me. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about protecting my firm. If I hired someone like her, someone who valued image over substance, my company would rot from the inside out. I was the gatekeeper. I looked at her resume again. Under skills, she had listed conflict resolution. I let out a short, dry laugh. She was about to experience a conflict she couldn't resolve with a hair flip and a compliment. The sun began to set outside my window, painting the city in shades of bruised purple and gold. My office darkened, but the glow of the monitors illuminated my face. I was rewriting the narrative. For my entire life, I had been the background character in the Clementine show. I was the prop she used to make herself look taller, smarter, better. But in this building, on this floor, the script was mine. I finished the list of questions. 12 impossible, technical, brutal inquiries designed to expose a fraud. I hit save. I leaned back in my chair, the leather groaning softly. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a notification from our internal server. Calendar update. Final round interview candidate C. Thorne confirmed. She had taken the bait. She had accepted the invite immediately. She probably thought she was special. She probably thought her urgent priority label had worked. She had no idea she was walking into a slaughterhouse. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. I looked down at the traffic crawling along the avenue 48 stories below. The cars looked like red and white blood cells moving through the arteries of the city. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. My reflection stared back at me. I didn't look like the mousy Evelyn from the barbecue. I looked like a shark. Friday was 2 days away. I needed to pick out my outfit. I needed something sharp, something intimidating. Something that screamed boss so loudly that she would feel small the moment she stepped through the door. I turned away from the window and grabbed my purse. I was going to leave early today. I needed to rest. I needed to be at the top of my game. As I walked to the elevator, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. The game was rigged. And for the first time in the history of our sisterhood, I was the one holding the controller. I'm Evelyn Thorne, 28 years old, and I am currently standing behind a pane of one-way glass, watching the sister who tormented me for 2 decades walk into the lobby of the financial empire she thinks I have nothing to do with. The observation room was dark. It was designed for security, tucked discreetly behind the reception wall. I pressed my forehead against the cold surface of the mirror. My breath fogged the glass for a second before fading away. It was 8:55 a.m. on a Friday. The lobby of Thorne Acquisitions was a masterpiece of intimidation. The floors were polished concrete. The lighting was sharp, clinical, and unforgiving. And walking across those floors, clicking her heels with a rhythm that screamed entitlement, was Clementine. I felt my stomach tighten into a hard, painful knot. She was wearing a suit that I recognized immediately. It was a cream-colored Armani two-piece. I knew for a fact that my mother had put it on her credit card last week. I remembered Mom mentioning on the phone that Clementine needed an investment wardrobe for her high-level interviews. They had no idea the investment was for an interview with me. I watched Clementine stop in the center of the room. She didn't look around to admire the architecture. She didn't look at the digital ticker tape running along the north wall. She looked at her phone. Then she looked up at the reception desk. My receptionist, Sarah, was 22 and sharper than most 50-year-olds I knew. Sarah smiled professionally. I couldn't hear the words through the thick glass, but I saw the body language. I saw Clementine's posture shift. She popped her hip out. She raised one perfectly manicured hand and snapped her fingers. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. She actually snapped her fingers at my staff. I saw Sarah pause. I saw the flash of confusion on Sarah's face, followed immediately by the steel mask of corporate training. Clementine pointed at the water carafe on the side table. She said something sharp. She gestured vaguely with her hand, a dismissal that said, "Fetch." Sarah stood up, walked around the desk, and poured a glass of water. She handed it to Clementine. Clementine took it without making eye contact. She took a sip. Then she made a face. She grimaced as if she had just swallowed poison. She said something else, looking at the glass with disgust, and set it down hard on the reception desk. "Too warm," I whispered to myself, reading her lips. She was complaining about the temperature of the complimentary water. I felt a surge of rage so pure it almost made me dizzy. This was my house. These were my people. And she was treating my headquarters like a hotel she was planning to leave a bad review for. I looked down at my own hands. They were trembling, not from fear. From the sheer, overwhelming desire to walk out there and scream at her. But I couldn't, not yet. The game required patience. I forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I watched as Clementine turned away from the desk. She began to pace. She wasn't nervous. Nervous candidates sit on the edge of the couch and review their notes. Nervous candidates check their watches and smooth their skirts. Clementine was prowling. She walked over to the wall where the one-way glass was installed. She stopped directly in front of me. I froze. Logically, I knew she couldn't see me. To her, I was just a dark, reflective surface. But standing there, inches away from her face, I felt exposed. She leaned in. I saw the heavy layer of foundation on her skin. I saw the slight smudge of lipstick on her bottom lip. She bared her teeth, checking for food. She used a fingernail to pick at something between her front teeth. She fluffed her hair, tossing the blonde waves over her shoulder. She winked at herself. She actually winked at her own reflection. She had no idea that the useless sister she had mocked at the barbecue 3 days ago was staring directly into her eyes. She had no idea that the person she called a failure was the one who signed the paycheck of the security guard standing 10 feet away. She smiled at herself in the glass. It was a practiced smile. It was the smile she used on my parents to get money. It was the smile she used on teachers to get extensions. It was a shark's smile, but she was a shark in a tank and I was the one tapping on the glass. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't look away from her face. I pulled it out by feel. It was a text from Marcus. She's here. The room is prepped. Shall I bring her back? I looked at Clementine one last time. She was checking her phone again, looking bored. She looked like she owned the place. She looked like she had already won. I typed back a single word. Wait. I needed one more minute. I needed to etch this image into my brain. I needed to remember exactly how arrogant she looked right now so I could savor the difference when she walked out an hour from now. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I was wearing black, severe, expensive, authored. I wasn't the little sister today. I wasn't the daughter who disappointed everyone by not becoming a doctor or a lawyer. I was the managing partner. I was the grim reaper of her career ambitions. I watched her check her watch and let out a dramatic, impatient sigh. She rolled her eyes at Sarah. That was it. That was the final straw. I put my phone away. My palms were sweating, but my mind had turned to ice. I walked out of the observation room and into the private corridor that led to the main conference room. The hallway was silent. My heels made a sharp, rhythmic clack, clack, clack on the floor. It sounded like a countdown. I reached the heavy double doors of the boardroom. I pushed them open. The room was vast. The table was 20 feet long, made of reclaimed mahogany. At the far end, a single chair was placed for the candidate. At the head of the table, my chair waited. I walked over to it. I placed my stack of files on the wood. The dossier on Clementine sat on top. I sat down. I spun the chair to face the door. I interlaced my fingers on the desk. I took a deep breath, letting the power of the room settle over me. I pressed the intercom button on the console. Marcus, I said, my voice steady, deep, and unrecognizable even to myself. Yes, Miss Thorne, send her in. I'm Evelyn Thorne, 28 years old, and I am currently staring at the second hand of my Rolex, counting down the seconds until I destroy my sister's ego. I had given the order to send her in, but I wasn't about to be sitting there waiting for her like an eager puppy. Power is about positioning. I had retreated to my private office, separated from the main conference room by a single soundproof wall. I watched the live feed on my monitor. I saw Marcus open the main doors. I saw Clementine strut in. She threw her bag onto the mahogany table like she owned it. Marcus gave a slight bow, his face perfectly neutral. The CEO will be with you shortly, Ms. Thorne, he said. He didn't say my name. He didn't say your sister. He just said the CEO. He backed out and closed the heavy oak doors. Clementine was alone. I checked the time. 9:00 a.m. exactly. I decided to wait exactly 5 minutes. 5 minutes in a silent, oversized boardroom is a lifetime. It's enough time for confidence to curdle into anxiety. I watched her on the screen. For the first minute, she was smug. She examined her nails. She touched her hair. By minute 3, she was annoyed. She tapped her foot. She let out a loud, dramatic sigh that the microphone picked up clearly. She checked her phone. By minute 4, the room started to get to her. The silence of a corporate boardroom is heavy. It presses down on you. She shifted in her chair. She looked at the door. She smoothed her skirt, her movements becoming jerky and nervous. She was wondering if she had been forgot. She was wondering if this was a test. Minute 5. I stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my black blazer. I didn't look at the monitor again. I walked to the connecting double doors. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady as stone. I gripped the cold brass handles. I didn't just open the doors, I threw them open. They swung wide with a heavy, expensive whoosh. I stepped into the room. I walked with my head held high, my heels clicking a sharp, deadly rhythm on the hardwood. Clementine looked up, annoyed. She had a scowl ready. She had a complaint about the wait-time balanced on the tip of her tongue. "It's about tea," the words died in her throat. I watched the blood drain from her face. It happened fast. 1 second she was flushed with entitlement, the next she was chalk white. Her eyes went wide. Her jaw actually dropped. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. She looked like she was hallucinating. She gripped the arms of her chair. She started to stand up, her legs shaking. Evelyn," she choked out. It was barely a whisper. Her knees buckled. She collapsed back into the chair with a dull thud. She looked small. For the first time in my life, she looked absolutely tiny. I didn't stop walking. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I walked straight to the head of the table. I pulled out the massive leather chair. I sat down. I placed her resume on the table in front of me. I interlaced my fingers. I stared at her. The silence stretched between us like a wire about to snap. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving under that expensive Armani suit my mother had bought her. "What are you doing here?" she stammered. Where is the CEO?" I leaned forward. The leather of my chair creaked. "Hello, Clementine," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of the person who signed the checks. "I am the CEO. I'm Keziah Vance, 27 years old, and I turned the years my parents spent calling me a burnout into a 9-figure cybersecurity empire that just locked my tormentor in a boardroom with me." The silence that followed my declaration was heavy enough to crush a lung. I watched Clementine blink. Once, twice. Her brain was misfiring. I could practically hear the gears grinding against the rust of her arrogance. She looked at me, then at the empty chair next to me, then back at the door I had just walked through. Then she did something I didn't expect. She laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a wet, jagged sound that scraped against the acoustic paneling of the room. It was the sound of a glass vase hitting a marble floor. "Okay," she wheezed, pressing a hand to her chest. "Okay, wow, you got me." She looked around the room, scanning the corners of the ceiling. She was looking for cameras. She was looking for a prank crew. She thought she was on a reality show. "Where are they?" she asked, her voice pitching up into a shrill register. "Is this for TikTok? Did Marcus put you up to this?" I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I just sat there, encased in my bespoke suit, watching her unravel. She stood up again, her legs gaining a little more stability as her delusion took hold. She smoothed her skirt with frantic, jerky movements. "God, Kezi, you almost gave me a heart attack," she said, exhaling a shaky breath. There it was, Kezi, the nickname she used to torment me when we were kids. The name she screamed when she locked me in the basement. The name she whispered when she told my high school crush I still wet the bed. Hearing it in this boardroom in my sanctuary felt like a violation. It felt like someone tracking mud onto a pristine white carpet. "I have to admit," she continued, her confidence bleeding back into her face like a returning infection. "It's a good look, the suit, very professional. Did you rent it?" She didn't wait for an answer. She was rewriting reality in real time to protect her ego. "Mom and Dad are going to be so relieved," she said, flashing that shark-like smile again. "I mean seriously, Kezi, a job here, even if it's just, administrative support or whatever. It's a start." She waved her hand dismissively at my position at the head of the table. "I can probably put in a good word for you with the actual hiring manager," she added, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Since I'm obviously a lock for the VP role, we could carpool. I'd charge you for gas, obviously, but it would be fun." She was digging her own grave. She was digging it with a shovel made of pure narcissism. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It wasn't nausea. It was the absolute certainty of my victory. I leaned forward. I placed my elbows on the mahogany table. I rested my chin on my interlaced fingers. I waited until her eyes met mine. "Sit down, Clementine," I said. My voice was low. It wasn't a request. It was a command issued by the person who owned the oxygen in the room. She froze. Her smile faltered at the edges. "Excuse me," she snapped, the old aggression flaring up. "Don't take that tone with me. I'm the one doing you a favor by not telling Mom you're playing dress up in." I said, "Sit down." The words cracked through the air like a whip. She sat. It was instinct. She dropped back into the leather chair, her mouth slightly open. I held her gaze. I let the silence stretch out again, pulling it tight until it hummed. "Let me be perfectly clear," I said, enunciating every syllable. "I am not playing dress up. I am not administrative support. And I certainly do not need you to put in a good word for me." I reached out and tapped the dossier on the table. "I don't work here, Clementine." She frowned, confusion warring with fear behind her eyes. "But you're in the room, you have the files." "I don't work here," I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. "I own the building." The color drained from her face for the second time, and this time it didn't come back. "I own the firm," I continued, enjoying the way her pupils dilated. "I own the intellectual property. I own the servers. I own the chair you are sitting in. I own the coffee you drank in the lobby." I paused. "And I own the decision on whether or not you ever work in this industry again." The silence that followed was deafening. It was total. I could hear the hum of the HVAC system. I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. I watched her try to process the scale of it. I saw her eyes dart around the room, looking at the expensive art on the walls, the panoramic view of the city skyline, the sheer square footage of my domain. She was doing the math. She was realizing that the useless sister she had mocked at the barbecue, the one she said would never amount to anything more than a burden, was worth more than she could count. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. "But how?" she whispered. You were in your basement, you dropped out," Mom said. "Mom was wrong," I said simply. She swallowed hard. I saw a bead of sweat trickle down her temple, cutting through the heavy foundation. Then the panic set in, real, genuine panic. She realized who held the cards. She realized she was sitting in a trap she had walked into willingly. She started to ramble. "Look, Keziah," she stammered, abandoning the nickname. This is amazing, truly. I always knew you were smart. I told Dad, didn't I?" I said, "Keziah is up to something big." "Lies." "We're family," she said, her voice trembling. "Blood is thicker than water, right? You need people you can trust at the top. Who better than your big sister? I could be your right hand. We could run this place together. Think about it. The Vance sisters taking over the city." She reached across the table, trying to touch my hand. I pulled back. I looked at her hand like it was covered in slime. "Family," I repeated, tasting the word. "You mean the family that made me sit at the kids' table last Thanksgiving? The family that told my fiancé I was a financial liability? Is that the family loyalty you're talking about?" She flinched. That was just joking," she pleaded, her eyes wide and wet. "You know how Dad is. We were just pushing you to be better. It was tough love." "Tough love," I echoed. I opened the dossier in front of me. I flipped past her resume. I flipped past her references. I landed on the background check my team had run that morning. "Is embezzlement also a form of tough love, Clementine?" The air left the room. Her eyes went wide. She stopped breathing. She looked at the folder under my hand. She knew what was in there. She knew about the funds that had gone missing from her last job. She knew about the accounting error that had been quietly swept under the rug in exchange for her resignation. She thought that secret was buried. She didn't know that my company specializes in digging up buried things. I, I can explain that, she squeaked. I'm sure you can, I said, closing the file with a soft thud, but not to me. I watched her eyes dart to the door. She wanted to run. She wanted to get as far away from me as possible, but she couldn't move. She was pinned down by the weight of her own history, and I was the one holding the magnifying glass. Please, she whispered. Keziah, don't do this. I leaned back in my chair. I felt a strange sense of calm. The rage was gone. It had been replaced by something colder, sharper, and infinitely more satisfying. I haven't done anything yet, I said. The interview hasn't even started. I tapped the intercom button. Marcus? Yes, Ms. Vance. Bring in the legal team, I said, my eyes never leaving Clementine's face. And bring a glass of water. My sister looks thirsty. I'm Keziah Vance, 27 years old, the former family disappointment who built a global cybersecurity fortress while my parents were busy placing all their bets on the wrong horse. The glass of water Marcus placed on the mahogany table trembled. It wasn't an earthquake. It was Clementine's hand. She reached for the crystal tumbler, her knuckles white, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the glass like nervous beetles. My head of legal, a sharp-eyed woman named Veronica, sat to my right with a notepad. Marcus stood by the door, silent as a statue. The room was air-conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees, but I could see a sheen of perspiration breaking out on my sister's upper lip. She took a sip, swallowing audibly, and tried to reset her face into the mask of the golden child. Okay, she said, her voice shaking only slightly. So the legal team is a bit much for a sisterly chat, don't you think, Keziah? But I get it, you have to flex, I'm proud of you. I didn't respond to the praise. I didn't care about her pride. I opened the leather-bound portfolio in front of me. This isn't a chat, I said, my voice flat and devoid of warmth. You applied for the Vice President of Strategic Operations, a role that requires absolute integrity and a genius-level understanding of data modeling. I am conducting your technical interview. She laughed again, but it was weak. Come on, I have an MBA from Wharton. My thesis was published. You know my qualifications. I do know them, I said. That's exactly what I want to discuss. I flipped a page in the dossier. Let's start with that thesis, I said, not looking up. Predictive algorithms in high-frequency trading. Mom framed the abstract, didn't she? Hung it right over the fireplace where my art project used to be. Clementine straightened her spine. It was a groundbreaking paper. It was, I agreed. Especially the section on stochastic volatility. Tell me, Clementine, in your research for Chapter 4, why did you choose the Heston model over the SABR model for the skew analysis? Silence. I looked up. Her eyes were blank. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The Heston model, she repeated, stalling. Well, obviously, because of the volatility surface. That's a buzzword, not an answer, I said, leaning back. The Heston model assumes volatility is a random process. The SABR model captures the volatility smile better for short maturities. In your paper, page 42, specifically, you argue vehemently for SABR, yet you just told me you chose Heston. She shifted in her chair. It's been a few years, Keziah. I don't have the text in front of me. You don't know the answer because you didn't write it, I said. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It wasn't a page from her thesis. It was a bank transfer record. November 2018, I read aloud. A wire transfer of $5,000 to a consultant named David P. Miller. a man who coincidentally specializes in ghostwriting academic papers for desperate trust fund kids. Clementine stared at the paper. Her face went from pale to a blotchy red. That was for tutoring, she stammered. He helped me edit. That's not illegal. It is when you sign an academic integrity pledge, I said. And it is certainly fraud when you use that credential to apply for a job at my firm. We verify everything, Clementine. We are a security company. Did you think we wouldn't check the source code of your life? She looked at Veronica, then back at me. You're trying to humiliate me, she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You're jealous. You've always been jealous. I'm vetting a candidate, I corrected her. And the candidate is failing. I flipped another page. Let's move to your work experience. You claim in your application that you spearheaded a 20% growth in Q3 revenue at your last firm. Impressive numbers. I am a closer, she said, clutching onto this lifeline. I bring in deals, ask anyone. I don't need to ask, I said. I have the data. I tapped the spreadsheet in front of me. I pulled the public filings and cross-referenced them with industry benchmarks. You didn't grow revenue by 20%. You artificially inflated the Q3 projections by pushing Q4 billing cycles forward. You cannibalized your own future to secure a bonus. She froze. That's standard practice, she argued, her voice rising in pitch. Everyone does it. It's called creative accounting. In my building, it's called lying, I said. And look at the fallout. Q4 dropped by 30% because you drained the pipeline. The stock took a hit. Layoffs happened. Real people lost their jobs because you wanted a new Porsche. Stop it, she snapped. You don't understand how the real world works, Keziah. You've been hiding in your basement with your computers. I am the real world, I cut her off. I slammed the portfolio shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. I built this, I said, gesturing to the glass walls, the skyline, the empire around us. I built it on precision, on truth. On the ability to see things that people like you try to hide. Clementine looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw the cracks go all the way through. Her lip trembled, her eyes filled with water. Why are you doing this? She whispered, her voice cracking. I'm your sister, Mom and Dad. They're getting old, Keziah. They just wanted one of us to succeed. If you give me this job, we can fix everything. I can learn. I can change. She was pivoting to the personal. She was pulling the family ripcord because her professional parachute had failed. Please, she begged, a single tear escaping and cutting a jagged track through her expensive foundation. I have debt, Keziah, massive debt. Marcus broke up with me. I need this salary. I need you to help me. I watched that tear fall. I remembered being 16 years old, crying at the dinner table because Clementine had told our parents I was on drugs to cover up the fact that she wrecked the car. I remembered them looking at me with disgust. I remembered her smirking behind her napkin. I felt a savage, cold sense of justice wash over me. It wasn't heat, it was the chill of absolute power. I am helping you, I said softly. She looked up, hope sparking in her wet eyes. You are? Yes, I said. I'm teaching you the lesson Mom and Dad never did. I stood up. I buttoned my blazer. Competence cannot be faked, Clementine, and actions have consequences. I looked at Veronica. Escort her out, I said, and make sure her security badge is deactivated before she reaches the elevator. Wait. Clementine scrambled up, knocking her chair over. You can't just, Keziah, you can't leave me like this. What am I supposed to tell Mom? I paused at the door. I didn't turn around. Tell her the truth, I said, if you can remember what that sounds like. I walked out of the boardroom, leaving my golden child sister sobbing in the ruins of her own ego. and for the first time in 27 years, I felt completely, wonderfully light. I'm Keziah Vance, 27 years old, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity firm, and I just watched my golden child sister crumble into a pile of lies right in my boardroom. My hand was on the door handle. I was ready to leave. I was ready to wash my hands of the toxic sludge that was my family history. But then a low, aggressive vibration rattled the mahogany table behind me. It wasn't Clementine's phone. It was mine. I stopped. The room went dead silent, save for Clementine's wet, ragged breathing. I turned around slowly. My phone was sitting face up on the table, right next to the glass of water Clementine had been clutching like a life raft. The screen was lit up. The caller ID displayed a single word that used to make my stomach turn over in panic. Mother. Clementine saw it too. Her eyes widened. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, smearing makeup across her cheek. Don't, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Keziah, please don't answer it, not now. She knew exactly what was coming. She knew the script our mother followed, and she knew she wasn't in the right costume to play her part today. I looked at the phone. I looked at my sister, begging me for mercy she had never shown me. I walked back to the table. My heels clicked rhythmically on the floor, click, 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 the sound of execution. Keziah, Clementine pleaded, half rising from her chair. I'll tell her myself, I promise, just let me. I reached out. I didn't pick up the handset. I pressed the green button, then I pressed the speaker icon. Keziah, my mother's voice filled the boardroom. It wasn't the shrill voice she used when she was screaming at me for leaving dishes in the sink. It was her business voice, sharp, impatient, entitled. Keziah, are you there? I've been calling Clementine, but she isn't picking up. I assume she's signing the contract. I held Clementine's gaze. I put a finger to my lips. SHH. She's here, I said calmly. We're just finishing up. Good, my mother snapped. Finally, I hope you didn't give her a hard time, Keziah. I know how you get. My heart rate didn't even spike. Years ago, this would have made me cry. Now it was just data. How do I get, mother? I asked. Petty, she said, the word hung in the air, magnified by the high-tech conference speakers. You get jealous, my mother continued, her voice dripping with disdain. You always have been, ever since you were little, but you need to put that aside today. Clementine needs this position. And frankly, your little company needs a face that people actually trust. Clementine squeezed her eyes shut. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Is that so? I asked. Yes, it is, my mother said. Look, I know you're technically the boss or whatever, but let's be realistic. Clementine is the talent. She's the one with the personality. She's the one who's going to take care of us and you when the real work starts. So stop playing your little power games, give her the salary she asked for, and let her fix whatever mess you're running over there. I looked at Veronica, my head of legal. Veronica was staring at the speakerphone, her jaw slightly unhinged. She had heard the rumors about my family. Now she had the receipts. She's the talent, I repeated, my voice flat. She's the golden child, Keziah, my mother said, sounding exhausted by my stupidity. She's special. You're the worker, you grind. That's fine, but Clementine shines. Now put her on. We have reservations at Le Bernardin tonight to celebrate. I assume you're paying. I took a deep breath. It tasted like ozone and victory. Actually, mother, I said, leaning closer to the microphone, I'm not paying. Excuse me. And neither is Clementine, I continued. Because she doesn't have a job. Silence on the line. What are you talking about? My mother demanded, her tone sharpening. I told you to hire her. I know what you told me, I said, but I don't work for you, and Clementine doesn't work for me. I looked directly at my sister. Tell her, Clementine. Clementine shook her head frantically. Tell her, I commanded. She She can't talk right now, I said to the phone when Clementine refused to speak. She's a bit indisposed. She's currently crying because I just exposed her for academic fraud, embezzlement, and lying on her resume. How dare you, my mother hissed. You liar, you jealous, spiteful little. She's sitting right here, mother. I cut her off. She's on speaker. She heard you call me petty. She heard you say I'm just the worker. She heard you say she's the only one with talent. I paused, and now she's hearing me tell you that she failed. Keziah, my mother warned, her voice trembling with rage. You fix this. You fix this right now or what? I asked. You'll call me useless, like you did at the barbecue last month, like you did when I got into state college instead of Ivy League, like you did when I started this company in my apartment. I never said, you said I was a waste of potential, I said. You said I was the practice run before you got it right with Clementine. I picked up the phone, I held it like a weapon. Well, your masterpiece just forged a federal document to try and get a job from your mistake. The gasp on the other end of the line was audible. It was a sharp, jagged intake of air. It was the sound of a worldview shattering. She didn't, my mother whispered. Clementine, tell her she's lying. Clementine sobbed. A loud, ugly, undeniable sob that echoed through the speaker. That was the answer. She can't help you, Mom, I said. And for the first time in my life, I'm not going to help you either. I looked at the door. Security was waiting. Do not call my office again, I said, my voice steady as steel. Do not call my cell. If you want to talk to a CEO, call someone else. If you want to talk to your daughter. Well, you should have thought of that before you bet everything on the wrong one. Keziah, wait, I tapped the red button. The call ended. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It was clean. I looked at Clementine one last time. She wasn't the golden child anymore. She was just a stranger in a blurred mascara mask. You should probably go, I said softly. You're going to be late for dinner. I turned my back on her. I walked out of the boardroom, past the stunned legal team, past the trembling glass of water, and out into the hallway of the empire I had built with my own two useless hands. I didn't look back. I had a company to run. I'm Keziah Vance, 27 years old, the founder and CEO of Vance Cybersecurity, and I just watched the golden child of my family dissolve into a puddle of mascara and panic in the middle of my boardroom. For years, I was the invisible one. I was the background noise while my parents broadcasted Clementine's achievements, real or imagined, on a loudspeaker. But today, the frequency changed. I stood at the head of the mahogany table, my hand resting on the leather back of my chair. I looked down at Clementine. She was trembling, clutching a glass of water like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. I had just exposed her fraud. I had just laid out the evidence of her embezzlement and her fake degree. I felt a savage, cold sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't happiness. It was the feeling of an equation finally balancing out after decades of error. I am helping you, I said softly. She looked up, hope sparking in her wet, red-rimmed eyes. You are. Yes, I said, I'm teaching you the lesson Mom and Dad never did. I buttoned my blazer. I smoothed the fabric over my waist. Competence cannot be faked, Clementine, and actions have consequences. I looked at Veronica, my head of legal, who was standing by the door with a look of professional pity. Escort her out, I said, and make sure her security badge is deactivated before she reaches the elevator. Wait, Clementine scrambled up, knocking her chair over with a deafening clatter. You can't just, Keziah, you can't leave me like this. What am I supposed to tell Mom? I paused. I didn't turn around. Tell her the truth, I said, if you can remember what that sounds like. My hand was on the door handle. I was ready to leave. I was ready to wash my hands of the toxic sludge that was my family history and get back to the work that actually mattered. But then a low, aggressive vibration rattled the mahogany table behind me. It wasn't Clementine's phone. It was mine. I stopped. The room went dead silent, save for Clementine's wet, ragged breathing. I turned around slowly. My phone was sitting face up on the table, right next to the scattered pages of Clementine's rejected contract. The screen was lit up. The caller ID displayed a single word that used to make my stomach turn over in panic. Mother. Clementine saw it too. Her eyes widened, terrified white circles in her flushed face. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, smearing expensive foundation across her cheek. Don't, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Keziah, please don't answer it, not now. She knew. She knew exactly what was coming. She knew the script our mother followed, and she knew she wasn't in the right costume to play her part today. I looked at the phone. I looked at my sister, begging me for mercy she had never shown me when we were teenagers. I walked back to the table. My heels clicked rhythmically on the marble floor. Click, 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 the sound of execution. Keziah, Clementine pleaded, half rising from her chair. I'll tell her myself, I promise, just let me. I reached out. I didn't pick up the handset. I pressed the green button, then I pressed the speaker icon. Keziah, my mother's voice filled the boardroom, amplified by the high-tech teleconferencing system I had paid $50,000 for. It wasn't the shrill voice she used when she was screaming at me for leaving dishes in the sink. It was her business voice, sharp, impatient, entitled. Keziah, are you there? I've been calling Clementine, but she isn't picking up. I assume she's signing the contract right now. I held Clementine's gaze. I put a finger to my lips. SHH. She's here, I said calmly. We're just finishing up. Good, my mother snapped. Finally, I hope you didn't give her a hard time, Keziah. I know how you get. My heart rate didn't even spike. Years ago, this would have made me cry in the bathroom. Now it was just data. How do I get, mother? I asked. Petty, she said. The word hung in the air, magnified by the speakers. You get jealous, my mother continued, her voice dripping with disdain. You always have been, ever since you were little, but you need to put that aside today. Clementine needs this position, and frankly, your little company needs a face that people actually trust. Clementine squeezed her eyes shut. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the floorboards. Is that so? I asked. Yes, it is, my mother said. Look, I know you're technically the boss or whatever, but let's be realistic. Clementine is the talent. She's the one with the personality. She's the one who's going to take care of us and you when the real work starts. So stop playing your little power games, give her the salary she asked for, and let her fix whatever mess you're running over there. I looked at Veronica. Veronica was staring at the speakerphone, her jaw slightly unhinged. She had heard the rumors about my family. Now she had the receipts. She's the talent, I repeated, my voice flat. She's the golden child, Keziah, my mother said, sounding exhausted by my stupidity. She's special. You're the worker, you grind, that's fine, we need grinders, but Clementine shines, now put her on. We have reservations at Le Bernardin tonight to celebrate, I assume you're paying. I took a deep breath, it tasted like ozone and victory. Actually, mother, I said, leaning closer to the microphone, I'm not paying. Excuse me. And neither is Clementine, I continued. Because she doesn't have a job. Silence on the line. What are you talking about? My mother demanded, her tone sharpening into a blade. I told you to hire her. I know what you told me, I said, but I don't work for you and Clementine doesn't work for me. I looked directly at my sister. Tell her, Clementine. Clementine shook her head frantically, tears flying. Tell her, I commanded. She can't talk right now. I said to the phone when Clementine refused to speak. She's a bit indisposed. She's currently crying because I just exposed her for academic fraud, embezzlement, and lying on her resume. How dare you, my mother hissed. You liar, you jealous, spiteful little. She's sitting right here, mother. I cut her off. She's on speaker. She heard you call me petty. She heard you say I'm just the worker. She heard you say she's the only one with talent. I paused. And now she's hearing me tell you that she failed. Keziah, my mother warned, her voice trembling with rage. You fix this. You fix this right now or what? I asked. You'll call me useless like you did at the barbecue last month, like you did when I got into state college instead of Ivy League, like you did when I started this company in my apartment while Clementine was partying in Europe on your dime. I never said, you said I was a waste of potential, I said. You said I was the practice run before you got it right with Clementine. I picked up the phone. I held it like a weapon. Well, your masterpiece just forged a federal document to try and get a job from your mistake. The gasp on the other end of the line was audible. It was a sharp, jagged intake of air. It was the sound of a worldview shattering. She didn't, my mother whispered. Clementine, tell her she's lying. Clementine sobbed. A loud, ugly, undeniable sob that echoed through the speaker. That was the answer. She can't help you, Mom, I said. And for the first time in my life, I'm not going to help you either. I looked at the door. I signaled for Marcus, my head of security. He stepped into the room, his massive frame filling the doorway. Do not call my office again, I said into the phone, my voice steady as steel. Do not call my cell. If you want to talk to a CEO, call someone else. If you want to talk to your daughter. Well, you should have thought of that before you bet everything on the wrong one. Keziah, wait, I tapped the red button. The call ended. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive. It was clean. I picked up the formal rejection letter from the table. I walked over to Clementine, who was now slumped in the chair, defeated. I placed the letter gently in her lap. You're unqualified for the level of excellence I require, I said. Clementine looked up at me, her face a ruin. Marcus, I said. Marcus stepped forward. Miss Vance, it's time to go. Clementine stood up shakily. She didn't look at me. She gathered her purse, her hands trembling so hard she almost dropped it. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor, a chaotic, desperate rhythm compared to my steady cadence. I watched her leave. I watched the door close behind her. I was alone. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city's skyline. I looked out at the steel and glass canyons, the world I had conquered while they were busy laughing at me. I checked my reflection in the glass. My blazer was crisp. My eyes were clear. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying since I was 16 years old. I turned back to my desk. I picked up my pen. I had a legacy to run. The barbecue era of my life was officially over.